The sun was beginning to set as Dr. Maya Washington drove home after a 12-hour shift at City General Hospital. Her shoulders ached from the long day of rounds and surgeries, but there was a sense of satisfaction in her tired smile. She had saved a life today. A young boy who'd come in with a dangerous brain swelling. As she drove through the quiet suburban streets, her mind was already halfway home, thinking about the hot shower and warm meal waiting for her. The flash of blue and red lights in her rearview mirror snapped her attention back to the road. Dr. Washington checked her speed. She was going exactly at the limit. Confused but calm, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, turning down the soft jazz that had been playing on her car radio. Officer Dennison had been on patrol for nearly 9 hours straight. His shift should have ended 2 hours ago, but another officer had called in sick, and he'd been asked to stay on. The coffee in his cup holder had gone cold hours ago, and the argument he'd had with his supervisor that morning was still playing on repeat in his head. When he spotted the black sedan with what he thought was a flickering taillight, he flipped on his lights and followed. Dr. Washington waited patiently as the officer took his time approaching her vehicle. She'd been in this situation before and knew exactly what to do. Hands on the steering wheel, visible. Engine off, window down, wait for instructions. License and registration, Officer Dennison said flatly, not bothering with a greeting. His hand rested casually on his holster, a detail that didn't escape Dr. Washington's notice. "Good evening, officer," she replied with a polite smile. "May I reach into my glove compartment for my registration and into my purse for my license?" Officer Dennison gave a curt nod, his eyes scanning the interior of her car with obvious suspicion. The hospital ID badge hanging from her rearview mirror caught the gleam of his flashlight, but he paid it no attention. Across the street, a small grocery store was closing up for the night. 2 workers stepped outside, locking the door behind them when they noticed the police lights. Something about the officer's stance made them pause. One of them, a young woman named Tanya, pulled out her phone and began to record discreetly. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Officer Dennison asked, his tone suggesting he already didn't believe whatever answer she might give. Dr. Washington handed over her documents with steady hands. "No, sir, I don't. Was I speeding?" "Your taillight is out," he replied, though when he'd walk around the car later, he'd find both taillights working perfectly fine. "I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for letting me know. I'll get it fixed first thing tomorrow," she said, maintaining her composure. Something about her calm demeanor seemed to irritate Officer Dennison. Perhaps it was the long shift, the argument from earlier, or something else entirely, but his jaw tightened as he examined her license. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he suddenly ordered. Dr. Washington blinked in surprise. "May I ask why that's necessary, officer?" "I've provided my license and registration as requested." "Step out of the vehicle now," he repeated, his voice rising. By this point, both grocery store workers were recording openly. A car driving by slowed down, the driver watching the scene unfold with concern. Dr. Washington took a deep breath. In her mind, she ran through everything she knew about her rights, about how to de-escalate situations, about staying alive during police encounters. She'd given this same talk to her nephew just last month. "I'm going to comply with your request, officer," she said clearly, wanting her intentions to be understood. "I'm unbuckling my seatbelt now, and I'm going to open my door slowly." She did exactly as she described, movements deliberate and telegraphed. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped out onto the pavement, her hospital scrubs still visible beneath her open coat. Officer Dennison's hand remained on his holster as he moved closer, invading her personal space. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Dr. Washington stood beside her car, the evening breeze carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. She kept her hands visible at her sides, her hospital ID badge still hanging around her neck after her long shift. "Turn around and face your vehicle," Officer Dennison commanded, his voice sharper than before. The grocery store workers across the street exchanged worried glances as they continued recording. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" Dr. Washington's voice remained steady, though her heart was beginning to race. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening here." Officer Dennison stepped closer. "I said turn around." Are you refusing to comply with an officer's orders? A small crowd was beginning to gather at a safe distance. An older gentleman walking his dog stopped at the corner. A young couple leaving the pizza place down the block slowed their pace. Everyone could feel that something wasn't right. I'm not refusing anything, officer, Dr. Washington said carefully. I'm simply asking for clarification. I've provided my documentation as requested. My taillight will be fixed tomorrow. I'm not sure why I needed to exit my vehicle. A passing truck slowed down, and from the driver's window, a man called out, "Everything okay over there?" His question hung in the air, unanswered but not unheard. Officer Dennison's hand moved from his holster to his radio. "I'm going to need backup at the corner of Elm and Pine," he said into it, eyes never leaving Dr. Washington. "Got a non-compliant subject during a traffic stop." Dr. Washington took a deep breath. "Officer, with all due respect, I have complied with every request you've made. I'm standing here. I've provided my information. I'm simply asking why this routine traffic stop has escalated." Tanya, still recording from across the street, whispered to her coworker, "Something's not right. That lady isn't doing anything wrong." Her coworker nodded, already dialing a number on his phone. The rain that had been threatening all evening finally began to fall, light drops creating dark spots on the pavement. Dr. Washington's scrubs were getting damp, but she remained still, knowing that any sudden movement could make things worse. "Put your hands on the hood of the car and spread your legs," Officer Dennison ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. "Officer, I don't understand. Am I under arrest? If so, for what crime?" Dr. Washington's professional training kicked in. Stay calm, ask clear questions, establish facts. A car pulled up across the street, and a middle-aged man in casual clothes stepped out. He watched the scene with particular attention, his expression concerned as he observed Officer Dennison's increasingly aggressive stance. "You don't ask the questions here," Officer Dennison snapped, moving toward her with handcuffs ready. "I do. And right now, you're interfering with an officer performing his duties." Dr. Washington slowly turned toward her car as instructed, placing her hands on the hood. The rain was falling harder now, running down her face and soaking into her coat. "I'm complying, officer," she said loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "I'm not resisting in any way." Officer Dennison roughly grabbed her wrist to apply the handcuffs. "You should have done this when I first asked," he muttered. "Excuse me," Dr. Washington winced at the tight grip. "You're hurting me." "There's no need for that." The middle-aged man who had been watching from across the street began to approach, walking with purpose. Something about his confident stride made a few bystanders glance his way. "Why was I pulled over?" "My taillights are working fine," Dr. Washington asked, turning her head slightly to look back at her car. Indeed, both taillights were clearly illuminated in the growing darkness, the rain making them shine even brighter. This observation seemed to push Officer Dennison over some invisible edge. His face flushed with anger. "Face forward," he shouted, grabbing her shoulder and spinning her around forcefully. "You don't tell me how to do my job." The crowd of bystanders grew more restless. Someone shouted, "Hey, take it easy." Another voice called out, "We're watching you, officer." The tension in the air was electric, amplified by the steady rain and the flashing police lights that painted everyone's faces in alternating blue and red. No one expected what Officer Dennison would do next, least of all Officer Dennison himself. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof of Dr. Washington's car and pattering on the shoulders of everyone watching. The blue and red lights from Officer Dennison's patrol car cut through the growing darkness, reflecting off the wet pavement like neon on black glass. "I said face forward." Officer Dennison shouted again, his voice cracking slightly. His grip on Dr. Washington's shoulder tightened. "I am facing forward," she replied calmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Officer, I'm a doctor. I've just finished a 12-hour shift saving lives. Whatever you think is happening here." Without warning, Officer Dennison grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. Dr. Washington let out a surprised gasp of pain. "Stop resisting," he yelled, though she clearly wasn't fighting back. "I'm not resisting," she said through gritted teeth. "You're hurting me for no reason." The growing crowd of bystanders reacted immediately. Some shouted in protest. Others raised their phones higher, making sure to capture everything. A woman covered her young son's eyes but didn't turn away herself. Then it happened. As Dr. Washington tried to maintain her balance on the wet pavement, she turned her head to look at Officer Dennison. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Something in her direct gaze seemed to snap whatever thin thread of control the officer had left. His hand swung up and across, striking her face with enough force that her glasses flew off and clattered onto the hood of her car. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. For a moment, everything seemed frozen in time, the rain suspended in mid-air, the lights no longer flashing, even the sounds of traffic fading away. Dr. Washington's head snapped to the side from the impact. When she slowly turned back to face Officer Dennison, a thin line of blood was trailing from the corner of her mouth. But instead of anger or fear, her eyes held something unexpected: pity. "My name is Dr. Maya Washington," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the situation. "I am a neurologist at City General Hospital. I am not resisting arrest. I have complied with all lawful orders, and there are at least 15 people recording what you just did." It was at that moment that Officer Dennison seemed to become aware of his surroundings again, of the crowd, the phones pointed at him, the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. The middle-aged man who had been watching from across the street was now just 10 feet away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "Lieutenant Davis, Internal Affairs," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Officer Dennison, step away from the citizen immediately." Officer Dennison's face drained of color. "Lieutenant, I said step away," Lieutenant Davis repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And remove those cuffs." Officer Dennison's hands shook as he fumbled with the handcuff key. The rain washed the blood from Dr. Washington's lip down her chin as she stood perfectly still, dignity intact despite the assault she had just endured. As the handcuffs came off, Dr. Washington slowly brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the metal had dug into her skin. She didn't run, didn't shout, didn't make any sudden movements. She simply bent down, carefully picked up her glasses from the hood of the car, and inspected the cracked lens. "Those were new," she said quietly, almost to herself. More police cars were arriving now, officers stepping out into the rain with confused expressions. One of them immediately came to Dr. Washington's side, offering a hand to support her. "Aren't you all right, ma'am?" the officer asked, genuine concern in her voice. Dr. Washington nodded slowly. "I'll be fine," she said. Then, looking directly at Officer Dennison, she added, "But I'm not sure about him." Lieutenant Davis was already on his radio, requesting medical assistance and speaking in clipped, professional tones about what he had witnessed. Officer Dennison stood alone in the rain, watching as his career, his reputation, and possibly his freedom washed away with each raindrop that fell. And through it all, the phones kept recording, capturing every second of justice unfolding in real time. The blue and white ambulance lights joined the police cars' flashing reds and blues, turning the rainy street into something that looked like an emergency disco. Dr. Washington sat on the back step of the ambulance, a thin blanket around her shoulders and an ice pack pressed against her cheek. Despite the paramedic's insistence, she refused to lie down. "I'm fine, really," she told the young paramedic trying to check her vital signs. "I'm a doctor. If I had a concussion, I'd know." 20 feet away, Lieutenant Davis was speaking with 3 other officers who had arrived on scene. Their faces were serious as they kept glancing over at Officer Dennison, who stood alone by his patrol car, staring at the ground as the rain soaked through his uniform. Tanya, the grocery store worker who had started recording first, approached the ambulance cautiously. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I got the whole thing on video. From when he first pulled you over, the way he was acting, it wasn't right from the beginning." Dr. Washington lowered the ice pack and gave Tanya a grateful smile. "Thank you. Would you mind sending that to Lieutenant Davis? I think it might be important." More people were gathering now, despite the rain. Some neighbors had come out of their houses, standing under umbrellas and whispering to each other. A news van pulled up at the end of the block, a reporter and cameraman quickly setting up under a large black umbrella. Lieutenant Davis finished his conversation with the other officers and walked over to Dr. Washington. "How are you feeling?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I've had better evenings," she replied with a small, pained smile. "But I'll be all right." "I'd like to apologize for what happened here tonight," the lieutenant said, removing his hat respectfully. "What Officer Dennison did was completely unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for as a department." Dr. Washington studied his face for a moment. "You weren't expecting to witness something like this tonight, were you?" Lieutenant Davis shook his head. "No, ma'am. I was just grabbing dinner after finishing some paperwork. When I saw how the traffic stop was escalating, I called it in and stuck around." He paused. "I'm glad I did." One of the other officers approached, holding Dr. Washington's purse and the paperwork from her car. "Your things, ma'am," she said, handing them over carefully. "We've documented the damage to your glasses. That will be included in the report." "Thank you, officer." Dr. Washington glanced at the name tag. "Officer Chen." "No need to thank me," Officer Chen replied quietly. "I'm just sorry this happened at all." Across the street, 2 more officers were now standing with Officer Dennison. One of them held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Officer Dennison unpinned his badge and handed it over, along with his gun and belt. "Is he being arrested?" Dr. Washington asked Lieutenant Davis. "Yes," the lieutenant confirmed. "Assault charges to start with. There will be a full investigation, and based on what I personally witnessed, he'll be facing serious consequences." He hesitated before adding, "We're not all like him, Dr. Washington." She nodded slowly. "I know that. I've worked with many fine officers at the hospital." She watched as Officer Dennison was escorted to a patrol car, not in handcuffs but with his head bowed in shame. What make him snap like that, I wonder? Lieutenant Davis sighed. "That's no excuse for what he did, but word is he's been having some personal problems. His wife left him last month, took their kids. He requested time off but was denied due to staffing shortages." The lieutenant shook his head. "Still, many officers go through hard times without assaulting innocent people." The news reporter was making her way toward the ambulance now, cameraman in tow. Dr. Washington's phone began ringing in her purse, the hospital administrator having already heard about the incident somehow. "Looks like this is going to get very public very fast," Dr. Washington said, looking at her phone screen. Lieutenant Davis nodded grimly. "These things always do these days, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say." Dr. Washington took a deep breath, straightened her back, and handed the ice pack back to the paramedic. "Well then," she said, voice steady and calm, "let's make sure some good comes from all this." By morning, Dr. Washington's face was on every local news channel. She sat in her living room, a cup of tea growing cold on the coffee table as she watched herself on the screen. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, a purple reminder of last evening's events. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since 5 a.m. Friends, colleagues, reporters, lawyers, everyone wanted to talk to her. She'd finally turned it to silent and placed it face down beside her tea. "Dr. Washington has declined to comment at this time," said the reporter on TV, standing outside the police headquarters downtown. But sources within the department confirmed that Officer Dennison has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Dr. Washington sighed and switched off the television. The sudden silence felt like a relief. She closed her eyes, trying to process everything that had happened. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw her sister standing on the porch, holding a paper bag from Dr. Washington's favorite bakery. She opened the door. "I brought those cinnamon rolls you like," her sister said, wrapping her in a careful hug, mindful of her injured cheek. "And I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm staying with you today." While they ate breakfast, Dr. Washington's sister scrolled through social media on her phone. "You're trending," she said, showing Dr. Washington the screen. "People are calling you a hero for how you handled yourself." Dr. Washington shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I was just trying to stay alive." "That's exactly why people are responding to this," her sister insisted. "You were so composed, so dignified, even when he hit you. Most people couldn't do that." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew their attention. Through the window, they saw a sleek black sedan with official government plates. "Were you expecting someone?" her sister asked. Dr. Washington shook her head and went to the door. A woman in a sharp suit stood on the porch, flanked by 2 assistants. "Dr. Washington, I'm Chief Rodriguez from the police department, she said, extending her hand. I was hoping we could speak privately. Inside, Chief Rodriguez declined offers of tea or coffee, getting straight to the point. What happened to you yesterday was inexcusable, she began, her voice firm but compassionate. I've reviewed all the footage, both from Officer Dennison's body camera and from bystander videos. There is no gray area here. He was wrong, period. Dr. Washington nodded, waiting for her to continue. I've called an emergency press conference for noon today, the chief continued. I want to publicly apologize to you and announce immediate changes to our department's training and oversight protocols. Dr. Washington raised an eyebrow. That's unusually transparent for a police department. Chief Rodriguez smiled grimly. The old playbook of denying, defending, and delaying doesn't work anymore, nor should it. The public deserves better. Our officers deserve better training. And you, doctor, deserved better treatment. She slid a folder across the coffee table. These are the changes we're implementing, effective immediately. New de-escalation training, bias awareness programs, and a complete overhaul of our use of force guidelines. Dr. Washington opened the folder and skimmed the documents inside. The comprehensive nature of the proposed changes surprised her. This is impressive, she admitted, but why show me this before announcing it? Chief Rodriguez leaned forward. Because I'd like you to be part of it, not just as the catalyst that made these changes necessary, but as an active participant in reshaping how our officers are trained. Dr. Washington blinked in surprise. You want me to help train your officers? Who better, the chief replied. You experienced firsthand what happens when an officer loses control. But more importantly, you showed remarkable presence of mind throughout the entire ordeal. That's exactly the kind of composure we need to instill in our force. Dr. Washington's sister, who had been quietly listening from the kitchen doorway, spoke up. You've always said the system needs to change from within. Dr. Washington stared at the open folder, at the bruise reflected in her window, at the chief waiting patiently for her answer. Outside, a news van slowly cruised past her house. When would you want me to start? She finally asked. The press conference room was packed wall to wall with reporters. Camera flashes popped like lightning as Chief Rodriguez approached the podium, her face solemn but determined. Dr. Washington sat to her right, hands folded neatly in her lap, the bruise on her cheek now partly covered with makeup but still visible. Good afternoon, Chief Rodriguez began, her voice echoing through the microphones. Yesterday evening, an unacceptable incident occurred in our city. One of our officers, James Dennison, violated the trust of this community and the oath he swore to uphold. The room fell silent as footage from Officer Dennison's body camera played on the large screen behind them. Dr. Washington kept her eyes forward, not turning to watch what she had already lived through. As of this morning, the chief continued after the video ended, Officer Dennison has been terminated from the police force. His case has been referred to the district attorney's office for criminal charges. A murmur rippled through the crowd of reporters. Usually, departments waited weeks or months before taking such definitive action. Additionally, Chief Rodriguez went on, raising her voice slightly to regain control of the room. We are implementing immediate and comprehensive changes to our training protocols, use of force guidelines, and accountability measures. She gestured toward Dr. Washington. Dr. Maya Washington has graciously agreed to assist us in developing new training programs that emphasized de-escalation, bias awareness, and proper conduct during civilian encounters. Dr. Washington leaned toward her microphone. I believe in second chances, she said, her calm voice instantly quieting the room. Not for Officer Dennison, his actions have consequences. But I do believe in a second chance for this department, for this system that failed not just me, but many others before me. A reporter raised her hand. Dr. Washington, will you be filing a lawsuit against the police department? Dr. Washington exchanged a glance with Chief Rodriguez before answering. No, she said simply. While I would be within my rights to do so, I believe my time and energy are better spent helping to prevent future incidents rather than seeking financial compensation for past wrongs. Another reporter called out, What would you say to Officer Dennison if he were here right now? The room grew quiet, everyone leaning forward slightly to hear her answer. Dr. Washington took a moment to consider the question. I would ask him why. What in his life, his training, or his heart made him believe that striking an unarmed woman who was complying with his orders was acceptable? I wouldn't ask out of anger, but out of a genuine desire to understand so we can address the root causes of such behavior. As the press conference continued, across town, Officer Dennison sat alone in his apartment, watching the live stream on his laptop. Empty takeout containers and unwashed clothes surrounded him, evidence of his life unraveling even before the incident. His phone had been ringing nonstop, mostly reporters, but also a few angry calls from family members who had seen the news. He stared at Dr. Washington's face on the screen, at the bruise his hand had left on her cheek. What had he been thinking? The truth was, he hadn't been thinking at all. For a moment, he'd just been angry at his ex-wife, at his supervisor, at the world, and Dr. Washington had been there, calm and composed in a way he couldn't manage to be. Back at the press conference, Chief Rodriguez was outlining the details of the new training initiatives when a handwritten note was passed to her by an aide. She read it quickly, her expression changing subtly. "I've just been informed," she announced, "that former Officer Dennison has reached out through his attorney. He wishes to make a public apology and has asked to meet with Dr. Washington privately, should she be willing." All eyes turned to Dr. Washington, whose surprise was evident despite her composed demeanor. "I would need to think about that," she said carefully. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination." As the press conference wrapped up, Dr. Washington's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "You're handling this with such grace. Mom and Dad would be so proud." Outside, a small crowd had gathered. When Dr. Washington emerged from the building, they broke into applause. An elderly woman stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, gripping Dr. Washington's hand. "My grandson is a young black man. Maybe now, when he gets pulled over, he'll have a better chance of coming home." 6 months had passed since that rainy evening. The seasons had changed, leaves had fallen, and snow had come and gone. Now spring brought new beginnings, both to the city and to Dr. Washington's life. She stood at the front of the training room, facing 30 police cadets in their crisp uniforms. Behind her, a screen displayed the now famous footage of her encounter with Officer Dennison. The room was silent as the video played through to its conclusion. "That's me," she said simply as the screen went dark. "And that was one of the scariest moments of my life." The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Others looked at her with a mixture of respect and shame. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," Dr. Washington continued, walking slowly across the front of the room. "I'm here because what happened that night matters not just to me, but to all of you, and to every person you'll encounter once you leave this academy." She clicked to the next slide, a brain scan. This was her territory, neurology, her life's work. "This is what happens in your brain during a high-stress situation," she explained, pointing to different colored areas on the scan. "Your amygdala, the part responsible for fear and aggression, takes over. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles rational thought, gets bypassed." A young cadet raised her hand. "Is that what happened to Officer Dennison?" Dr. Washington nodded. "Partly yes, but understanding the science doesn't excuse the behavior. It just helps us prevent it." At the back of the room, Chief Rodriguez watched with approval. The program Dr. Washington had helped develop was already showing promising results. Complaints against officers were down 30% in just 6 months. After the training session, Dr. Washington packed up her materials as the cadets filed out. One hung back, waiting until the others had left. "Dr. Washington," he said hesitantly, "my uncle is a cop in another city. He's one of the good ones, but he says the job changes you over time. Makes you see threats everywhere. How do we stop that from happening to us?" She considered the question carefully. "Awareness is the first step," she replied. "Recognizing when your stress response is taking over. And then, connection, remembering that the person in front of you is just that, a person with their own fears and hopes, just like you." Across town, in a small coffee shop away from prying eyes, former Officer Dennison waited nervously. The bell over the door jingled, and he looked up to see Dr. Washington entering. This was their third meeting, part of a restorative justice program they had both agreed to participate in. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down across from him. She nodded but said nothing, waiting for him to continue as they had practiced. "I've been working with the therapist you recommended," he said, his fingers fidgeting with a napkin. "We've been talking about my anger issues, about how I let my personal problems affect my work that day." He paused. "That's not an excuse." "No," Dr. Washington agreed quietly. "It's not." "I've also been speaking at the community center," he continued, talking to kids about accountability, about how one moment of losing control changed my entire life. He looked up at her. "And yours?" Dr. Washington stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Life changes whether we want it to or not," she said. "The question is what we do with those changes." Later that evening, Dr. Washington sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset. Her sister joined her, bringing out 2 glasses of lemonade. "I saw you on the news again," her sister said, settling beside her. "Those cadets looked like they were hanging on your every word." Dr. Washington smiled. "I hope so. If even one of them remembers my story during a tense moment on the job, then something good came from all this." Her phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Davis, who had become a friend over the months. "Just wanted you to know. The City Council unanimously approved the new Police Oversight Committee today. You made this happen." Dr. Washington showed the message to her sister, who squeezed her hand in response. As darkness fell over the neighborhood, porch lights flickered on up and down the street. From somewhere nearby came the sound of children's laughter, a dog barking playfully, the everyday symphony of community life continuing. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" her sister asked softly. Dr. Washington was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," she finally admitted. "But then I think about those cadets today, about the changes in the department, about all the people who might come home safely because of what we've learned." She touched her cheek where the bruise had long since faded. "Some lessons leave marks. The important thing is that we learn from them."